There's a moment in life when the ground beneath your feet doesn't just crack, it disappears. For me, that moment came when my father died, but it wasn't the death itself that shattered my world. It was the letter he left behind, tucked inside a worn envelope that somehow found its way to my trembling hands at his funeral. Growing up, I always thought my mother was just strict. She ruled our house like a fortress with rules that felt more like chains. She was always angry or tired or both. The kind of anger that didn't burn bright but lingered like a cold shadow in every corner of our home. I never questioned it. Not really, because that's what kids do. They accept their world as it is, even if it feels wrong. Mom never spoke much about Dad. When they divorced, I was just a toddler, barely old enough to remember faces, let alone stories. She painted him as a ghost, a distant figure who failed to stay, who abandoned us. And me? I believed her. I believed she was protecting me, or maybe protecting herself. The truth was buried beneath years of whispered arguments and slammed doors. But then came the funeral. I barely knew how to stand still. The room was filled with people I barely recognized. Distant relatives, old friends, strangers. I was lost in a haze of grief I didn't quite understand. And then a woman I didn't know approached me, handing me an envelope. "It's for you," she said softly. I clutched it, feeling the weight of its contents more than the paper itself. Later that night, in the quiet of my room, I broke the seal. Inside was a letter, scrawled in my dad's familiar handwriting. Shaky, but unmistakable. The first line stopped me cold. "If you're reading this, it means she finally let you near me." Those words echoed in my mind, stirring memories I thought were forgotten. The letter was more than just a goodbye. It was a story. His story. One I'd never heard. He wrote about the fight for custody, the battles in courtrooms and in letters never sent, how he tried to visit me, to send gifts, but his efforts were blocked, how my mother told him I didn't want to see him, a lie that twisted the truth like a knife. Every line felt like a betrayal, but also an explanation. It explained the silence that had surrounded him, the absence that had shaped my childhood. By the time I finished reading, tears blurred my vision. For the first time, I saw my mother in a new light, not just as the strict, angry woman I knew, but as someone tangled in pain, secrets, and lies. But there was one thing that haunted me more than any revelation. If she hated him so much, why did she cry harder than anyone else at his funeral? That question lingered like a shadow, refusing to be ignored. The morning after the funeral, everything felt heavier. Not just the grief, I could manage that, but the questions. They crept into my chest like smoke, choking out the version of my life I thought I knew. I sat in the kitchen, the envelope still on the table in front of me, rereading the letter like some ancient script that might reveal more if I stared long enough. Mom was in the next room talking in hushed tones on the phone. I couldn't hear the words, but I could hear the weight in her voice. That brittle edge she always carried had cracked since the funeral, and something raw was leaking out. I'd never seen her like that. I had always believed that she was the one who kept our family together after Dad left, the one who worked 2 jobs, who packed lunches, who yelled when I stayed out too late but always left the porch light on. But now I had a letter in my hand that said maybe she wasn't just holding things together. Maybe she was hiding them. That afternoon, I went looking. For what, I wasn't sure. Maybe answers, maybe proof. I started in the attic, the place where old boxes and forgotten memories gathered dust. I found photos of my parents from before the divorce. They looked happy, or maybe just young. It's hard to tell the difference when you're trying to read truth from a smile. And then I found the box. It was labeled legal in thick black marker. Inside were files, court documents, custody agreements, and letters. Letters addressed to me. Postmarked from towns I never visited, all unopened. I pulled one out and ripped it open. "Hey kiddo, I know you might not want to read this, but I wanted to try. I miss you. I think about you every day. I saw a kid with your same backpack and I smiled, thinking about when I bought it for you. I hope you're happy. I hope you're safe. Love, Dad." There were at least a dozen like it, some longer, some just a few lines, all soaked in longing. Why didn't she give them to me? I sat there for hours, reading every word, until the light from the attic window began to fade. When I finally came back downstairs, Mom was at the kitchen sink. She turned when she saw me and froze. Her eyes locked onto the stack of letters in my hands. "You went through the attic," she said flatly. "You told me he never tried," I said. My voice sounded different. Older, maybe. She turned away, grabbed a dish towel, and held it like a shield. "Because it was easier that way," she muttered. "You needed someone to blame. It couldn't be me." That sentence hung in the air between us like a punch. I wanted to scream, to throw the letters, to demand why she lied, why she painted Dad as someone who didn't care when he was writing me letters every birthday. But I didn't. I just sat down, the letters in my lap, and waited. Eventually, she sat across from me. For the first time in my life, she looked tired in a way that went beyond physical. "You want to know everything?" she asked. I nodded, and she told me about the fights, about how Dad had cheated on her, how he used charm like a weapon, how the court sided with him more than once, and she was terrified he'd take me away. She told me about one night when he showed up drunk, banging on the door, shouting her name. "I didn't want to destroy your image of him," she said, "but I didn't want to lose you either." It wasn't an apology, not really, but it was something. Something like the truth, though filtered through years of fear and silence. I told her what was in the letter. Her eyes welled up, but she didn't cry. "He always knew what to say to make people love him," she whispered. Maybe she was right. Maybe Dad was complicated. Maybe he was broken too. Maybe everyone in this story was. That night, I didn't sleep much. I laid in bed thinking about how easy it is to accept one version of a story when it's the only one you're told, and how terrifying it is to realize you were only ever given half. The letter didn't make Dad a saint, but it didn't make Mom a monster either. The truth, as always, lived somewhere in the silence between them, and now it lived with me. Because once you read something like that, you can't unread it. And once you see the cracks in your childhood, you can't pretend they were just lines in the paint. Next morning, I went to the post office. I mailed one of Dad's old letters back to myself. I wanted to remember what it felt like to receive something real. Because for the first time in years, I wasn't just the child caught in the middle. I was the one holding the pieces. There are some truths people bury not to protect others, but to protect themselves from who they were when those truths were born. That was the energy my mother carried in the days after our confrontation. She didn't apologize. She didn't open up more, but something changed. Her silence wasn't cold anymore. It was tense. Like she knew the dam had cracked, and it was only a matter of time before everything came flooding out. The next few days, I kept to myself. I reread the letters, all of them, and I started thinking about what else I'd missed, what else she'd buried. That's when I remembered the box in her closet, the one she always kept locked. And one afternoon when she left to buy groceries, I searched for the key. I don't say that proudly. I didn't want to invade her space, but I also didn't know how else to get the full picture. I had heard her version. I had read his, but something was still missing. I found the key in a small wooden bowl inside her nightstand, underneath a pile of old receipts and bobby pins. The box creaked when I opened it. Inside, I found journals, dozens of them. My mother's handwriting was unmistakable, neat, rigid, like she was trying to control the words before they even hit the page. The earliest entries were from when she was pregnant with me. "He said he wants this baby." But I saw the look in his eyes when I told him. It wasn't joy, it was fear. And I don't think he's ready. I don't think I am either. Page after page, the years unraveled. He stayed out late again, smelled like whiskey and something else. I asked him if he was seeing someone. He didn't deny it, just laughed and said I was being dramatic. Today he promised he'd take me to the park. He never showed. He says he forgot, but you don't forget your own child. I didn't want to believe it, but I couldn't ignore the consistency. There were entries about his absences, his mood swings, the day she filed the custody papers, but the one entry that gutted me was from my 4th birthday. He brought gifts. Expensive ones, the kind a kid would love. He stayed for cake and left early. Then, 2 weeks later, I get a letter from his lawyer accusing me of trying to alienate him, all because I didn't let him take me for the weekend. I was scared. He reeked of gin. It all collided in my head. His words, her pain, my memories, or the absence of them. Who was I supposed to believe? And that's when it hit me. Maybe both of them were telling the truth, their own versions of it. My dad remembered trying. Maybe he did. Maybe he wanted to be better. My mom remembered the pain. Maybe she had every right to. And me? I was just a kid caught in a storm 2 adults created, but never had the courage to end cleanly. When she came home that day and saw me with the journal spread out across the bed, she didn't yell. She didn't scold. She just sat down beside me quietly. "I never wanted you to read those," she whispered. "I know," I replied, "but I needed to." She stared at the pages for a long time, then finally said, "I used to think keeping you safe meant shielding you from the truth. Now I wonder if it just kept you confused." There was no anger in her voice, just fatigue, the kind that comes from carrying a secret for too long. We talked, not as mother and child, but as 2 people who both lost something they couldn't name. I didn't forgive her that night, not completely, but I started to understand, and maybe that's where healing really begins. Not with forgiveness, but with finally seeing someone clearly, even if it breaks your heart. Grief doesn't always end in tears. Sometimes it ends in choices, and those choices, the ones no one else can make for you, become the story you carry for the rest of your life. After my talk with Tom, after the journals, the letters, the truth, the lies, I felt like I was walking through a house I'd lived in my whole life, but only just noticed the cracks in the foundation. Everything looked the same. My room, the walls, the smell of the old sofa. But I was different now. And because of that, nothing felt safe. I found myself waking up at 3 a.m. most nights, unable to breathe. Not because I was crying, because my identity, the me I thought I was, had collapsed. I'd built my life on 2 people, a mother who raised me but built fences with silence, and a father who loved me but disappeared behind court dates, accusations, and his own demons. So what now? What do you do when you realize both of your parents were broken? And that they broke you too? One morning, I decided to visit my dad's grave. It had been a few weeks since the funeral, but I hadn't gone back. I wasn't ready then. Maybe I wasn't ready now either. But I went. The cemetery was quiet. Cold wind, gray skies. I found his name carved in stone, still so new that the earth around it hadn't settled. I sat down and said nothing, just let the silence settle. Then I spoke. Not out loud, but in my head, because I didn't know how to pray, but I knew how to remember. "I don't know who you were, really," I thought, "but I think you tried, and maybe that counts for something." I took one of the birthday cards out of my jacket pocket, the one he wrote when I turned 13. I read it quietly. It was stupid, silly, full of dumb dad jokes. I smiled, then cried, then smiled again, and I left the card there, under a rock. It felt like letting go of something, though I couldn't name what. When I got home, I found my mom sitting at the kitchen table. There was a photo album in front of her, old, leather-bound, dusty. She didn't say anything, just slid it across to me. Inside were pictures I'd never seen. Me, him, her, together. before things went bad, picnics, a beach trip, Christmas morning. "Why didn't you show me these?" I asked. She looked tired. "Because I didn't want you to miss something you could never have back." I flipped through the album for an hour, and then I asked her a question I never thought I would. "What did you love about him?" She blinked. Tears welled up in her eyes, but she didn't look away. "He made me laugh when I didn't think I could," she said. "He loved music, bad at dancing, terrible cook, but he loved being a dad, even if he didn't know how to do it right." That was the first time I saw my parents as people, not just as roles, and I realized something no one ever tells you when you grow up. You don't have to choose which parent to believe. You just have to choose which truths you're willing to carry. A few days later, I took the journals, the letters, and the photo album. I packed them all in a box, not to forget, to preserve. I labeled it, "What Made Me." Because in the end, the story of your parents isn't just about them. It's the origin story of you. And when people ask me what kind of man my father was, I tell them this: he was the kind of man who made mistakes, the kind of man who tried, and the kind of man who left me one final gift, a letter that broke me open, just enough to finally start healing.